Oh, welcome back, everyone. So good to be with you here as we continue on this webinar series for Operation Injured Soldier. And we're really talking about how emotional and mental health impact returning vets, individuals who have served in the armed forces. And we're walking through really a step-by-step examination of how emotional health, specifically trauma, impacts the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we engage with people in our lives that we love and care about. And that is going to bring us to our conversation today. We're talking about relationships under fire. More specifically, we want to talk about marriage and significant emotional or connected relationships, and then friendships as well. And because we are walking through different areas of how this impacts us, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview because we're about halfway through our series in this webinar. And I want to just talk a little bit about relationships and about trauma and how that works. And I want to point out that trauma does not only wound the individual, it impacts every relationship connected to that person. So healing happens when people learn how to move from ready mode or survival mode into safe, connected relationships again. There are only two ways for the brain to operate in terms of relationships, and you can either be in one mode or the other. So there are only two modes when it comes to relationships. We are either in what is called friendship mode, or we are in what is called enemy mode. And this research comes from a neuroscientist that's based out of Colorado. His work found that when we are in the prefrontal cortex, or we're in the upfront part of our brain, and maybe that term sounds familiar to you because that is the military typically refers to our prefrontal cortex as the front part of the brain, or the upfront brain. And when we're in our upfront brain, we are in relational mode or friendship mode. It's where we are kind. It's where we're curious. It's where we have critical thinking. It's where we have joy and laughter. We're nice to be around. People enjoy being around us. That's when we're in friendship mode. When we are in the back part of our brain, or what is called the limbic system, we fall into what is called enemy mode. And that's where we see people as threats, as problems to be solved, or as people that need to be avoided. I don't know if you've ever had this before, but I've worked with at this point thousands of people in my career. And there are some who wake up in the morning and really believe that everybody in the world woke up with the specific agenda just to tick them off for the day. I know that sounds crazy, but there are people who think that way. And maybe you've had a day like that. Like if you've ever gotten out of bed and something bad happened, and every person you met, the person who was driving to work in front of you, going 10 miles under the speed limit, you start kind of crafting a thought in your mind, or a conspiracy, I like to call it, where you imagine that person knows who you are and they know that you need to get to work, and they've decided to go 10 miles under the speed limit just to make sure that you do not get to work on time. In fact, then when they put their blinker on the same way you need to turn, you just start imagining that they're going to do this all the way to work, and that they literally woke up in the morning and put a plan together to target you, to tick you off. That's enemy mode. Now, it doesn't have to be just when we're driving. We can actually fall into enemy mode with our friends. We can fall into enemy mode with our spouse. We can fall into enemy mode with our kids. And if we've been through any type of trauma, there's a really good chance that we will, in fact, get triggered and we will inadvertently fall into enemy mode. And I want to talk a little bit about how trauma. Jules, what's up? Good to see you. I just want to acknowledge that you're here, Jules. what we want to, I just want to walk through here an understanding of trauma from a base level, just because we're halfway through the webinar here. Trauma affects our nervous system. It affects our emotional regulation. It affects our trust. It affects our communication. It affects our attachment, and it affects our conflict response. So people who have been through trauma, and this isn't all the time, so it's not 100% chance that this is going to happen. But very often, people who have been through high trauma, or what we would call stress beyond our ability to cope in the moment, people who have been through that level of trauma have trouble trusting other people. And sometimes connection can actually feel like it's dangerous, which means the closer you get to someone who has been in trauma, the more likely they are to try to push you away in some way. Because for them, connection means vulnerability. Vulnerability means I'm not safe. I'm not safe means I need to get out. It's super common for people who have been through traumatic experiences. It's super common for them to sabotage relationships that are going really well, like get into a really significant relationship. Maybe you're talking about moving in together, you're talking about getting married, you're talking about meeting the parents, whatever it is, you start to take things a little more seriously. And then all of a sudden, to have that person who's been through trauma do something to totally hijack the relationship and sabotage it. Part of that is not that they have a fear of commitment. It's actually they have a fear of connection, and that it's really hard to connect. And so it can do a whole lot to your relationship when you have been through a traumatic situation. I just want to go through a couple of the trauma responses, or what we call stress responses. The first one is fight. And I know I've talked about these before in different webinars, but I'm going to go over it again. Fight is when we power up. It's where we get angry. It's where we get irritable. It's where we fall into control. It's where we get defensive. Then there's flight, which is when we can get busy overworking, or we try to stay busy. We move into avoidance, or we escape emotionally and we kind of numb out. Then you can fall into freeze, which is a greater form of flight. That's when we fall into emotional numbness. We start to shut down. We have detachment. We start to isolate. And then we have fawn. Fawn is one that is not commonly talked about, but it's really important because it can be hard to recognize. Fawn is when in our stress and in our trauma, we try really, really hard to please people. We fear conflict, and so we overcompensate to try to make everybody else happy, and we lose our personal boundaries. The problem with people who fall into fawn is that you won't see them operating like they're stressed out. They'll actually do everything they can to try to make you happy, and it will be hard for you to see if they're actually struggling. The best example I can give you of fawn comes from 2020. A friend of mine passed away, and his wife, it was a really sudden passing. He had embolism, and it went to his lungs, and he died. I mean, it was just super quick and super brutal. And his wife, a couple of days after he had passed, was at the funeral. And mind you, this is her husband's of like 40 some years funeral. So this is a long time relationship. And she, at the funeral, after the memorial was done, she was walking around making sure people had enough to eat. Like, her husband just died, and she's worried about whether people are eating the food or not. That is a classic response of a traumatic stress and a fawning behavior of someone just trying to, I can't slow down. I can't stop. I have to make sure everybody else is okay. And that shows up. And what's really hard, if you have a loved one, if you have someone in your life who has been through trauma, whether that's in combat or through the military or in life circumstances, and they have a fawn disposition, you might never know that they're struggling. It can be really hard. So it's important to just pay attention to say, hey, if somebody's overcompensating or they've got the disease to please on overdrive, it may actually be an indication that they're under way too much stress or duress. Trauma usually looks like rejection in relationships, but it's not rejection. It's usually protection. When trauma manifests into relationships and we see people that are pulling away or they're being difficult to be around, excuse me, it's usually not a matter of them trying to reject people. It's them trying to protect themselves. And so a lot of trauma survivors will show signs of avoiding vulnerability. Did you know, this probably won't surprise you, but Kyle, you can be my barometer on this. Did you know that men get uncomfortable when they talk about things that make them uncomfortable? Yeah. That pretty much tracks. So if you have, especially someone who has been in the military in a relationship and they are a man and you ask them, hey, tell me how you're feeling or something like that, it's going to bomb. It's going to bomb. I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's going to really make them uncomfortable unless they've been through a lot of therapy and they worked through all of that. And even then it makes them uncomfortable. So men typically avoid vulnerability. Men who have been through trauma definitely avoid vulnerability. It's hard because vulnerability means I might not be safe. I could put myself in a situation where I could be hurt, whatever that looks like. Emotionally, I just can't go there. People who have been through trauma fear they fear being misunderstood. So if you don't think something's going to go well, you don't think somebody's going to understand, you don't think somebody's going to connect, they're not going to talk. They're not going to open up because it is better to stay silent than to risk being misunderstood or having things go badly. They tend to anticipate disappointment. So if you know anybody like that's an Eeyore, I don't know if you ever watched Winnie the Pooh or read any of the books, but Eeyore was a donkey and he was pretty down all the time. And he would say things like, it's a tail, but it's not much of a tail. And all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes people who have been through trauma, they kind of carry this heavy, downcast, anticipating disappointment, kind of like they're a rainy cloud on a sunny day kind of deal. Like, yeah, it's sunny now, but we're all going to get sunburned later or whatever it is. That's just a way of them expressing, hey, I've been hurt before. I've experienced things that didn't go the way I wanted to before. And what is easier, honestly, when you think about this, is it easier to believe that things are going to be good and go well? Or is it easier to believe that something's going to get screwed up and that way I don't have to be disappointed when it happens? Because disappointment is hard. And if you can prepare yourself for disappointment, then you don't have to feel the pain as much. But then it's also a pretty depressing way to walk through life. And people who have been through trauma struggle to feel emotionally safe. And this is a really hard one. And we're going to get into this a little bit more kind of when we get to the case studies. I'm going to share some stories with you of clients that I've worked with in the past. But if you struggle to feel emotionally safe, then you're going to struggle sharing and opening up to the people in your life. In fact, for some, and this may not surprise you, it is actually easier for an individual who has been through a traumatic situation to share with a bunch of people they don't know than to share with the one person that they know the most. It's true. Because when someone's that close, man, if you risk that relationship, something happening to it, you feel like you lose everything. And emotional safety is a really interesting thing right now. If you're doing any reading on psychological safety or emotional safety, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, a lot of cultures are striving to create a space where people feel psychologically safe. I can give you a perfect example of it. It pretty much any job If you get an email from your boss saying we need to meet in a half an hour and it's a last minute, you weren't planning on it, the number one thought that people think is, what did I do wrong? And am I going to get fired? Like, that is so everybody walks into the workspace with this idea of, I could lose my job today. I mean, and it doesn't matter how hard you work on the culture. It doesn't matter how hard you work on telling people, hey, you got to, in fact, I was talking to a business owner today and he said, people have to work really, really hard to get fired by me. I mean, you have to do something really, really bad. And it's true, Kyle, it's true. Like, you have to do something really, really bad to get fired these days. But we all carry this fear when we walk into some sort of position, job, workspace, relationship, that something's going to go bad. And what psychological or emotional safety provides is a possible option that, hey, it's not that bad. It's not going to be that bad. I'm not going to lose my job. When I feel psychologically or emotionally safe in my job and my boss sends me an email, I'm like, cool, my boss wants to meet. But if I don't feel psychologically safe, I'm like, he's going to fire me. And the same thing is true in marriage as well. And so I want to then walk through here some common marriage struggles. And these are things that I think probably at this point, I've worked with 200 couples, maybe 300 couples in my career. I'd have to go back and look at all my notes, and I got a lot of notes, but I've worked with a lot of couples, and many of them have come from traumatic situations, one or both. And many of them have come from military experiences, because that's an area that I work in. Here's a common marriage struggle for couples where one or both individuals have experienced trauma: emotional distance. If you have a spouse that doesn't like to share how they feel, now that could just be the way they were raised or their family of origin, but if they've been through trauma, it can be really, really hard for them to share their feelings. It can also be really hard. Sometimes they have what is called a flat affect, which, if you're looking at my face, when we don't have a flat affect, we have our eyebrows up, we express with our face. When we have been through trauma, or people have been through trauma, they'll usually have a flat affect. You won't be able to read what's going on in their face. You don't know what's going on in their head. They're really hard to read from their visuals, because a lot of it is them trying to protect themselves from feeling emotional pain. You'll also see increased conflict. People who have been through trauma and pain, they can be highly reactive. And when there's reactivity, there's usually conflict. Irritability, it's another big one. When people are just crabby and testy and they run low on patience. And that's not because they're tired. It's not because it's been a long day. It's just they're kind of always on edge. That could be an evidence of the nervous system being out of control or overreactive or hyper alert. You might see difficulty, as I said, expressing emotions, a lack of intimacy. That is usually translated by a lack of emotional intimacy. Interesting thing about men and women, statistically speaking, this is not a generalization. This is based on stats. When men are under stress, their sex drive typically increases. When women are under stress, their sex drive typically decreases. Also, interesting fact, the less men have sex, the more they think about it. And the less women have sex, the less they think about it. So if you couple it with stress and drives, when we're talking about sexual intimacy, trauma actually impacts it a lot. Because it triggers stress and things like that, and you have higher triggers. So it's just good to pay attention to that. It can lead to a lack of sexual intimacy, and it can also lead to a lack of emotional intimacy. Common marriage struggles for trauma also involve trust issues, highly suspicious. You see people checking each other's phones, reading each other's text messages, going back over months to read through text messages to see if there was anything going on. Using the Life 360 app, checking multiple times a day, or the Find My on the iPhone to make sure you know where they are, how fast they're going, how much money they spent, pouring over the credit cards, just living in a constant state of questioning behavior that can be, again, a part of a trauma response, usually because they want to make sure that they know exactly what's going on because they've been burned before. And if I can be aware of it, then it doesn't have to hurt me as much. You're going to see communication breakdowns. I see that a lot. There are two purposes for communication. One is to relay information, which that's when you send a text message or an email, or you have a little chit chat about where the kids need to be after school, or who's making dinner or picking up whatever from the grocery store. That's all about sharing information or relaying information. The primary purpose, however, in marriage and in significant relationships for communication is connection. Like we talk so we can connect, and time talking together is what builds trust in a relationship. So if you're tracking with me, when someone has had a trauma response, when they're triggered, they pull away. It's hard for them to share their emotions. You feel like they're being distant. You're not talking. You're not connecting. You feel like you're ships in the night. And then all of a sudden, your roommate's raising kids. And that is no fun because parenting sucks. And if you don't have somebody else with you on your side, it can feel really, really lonely and isolating. And so it can move you into a space where you start to see communication break down, and then you feel emotionally alone. I think the key is, especially when we're talking about couples and individuals who are working through trauma responses, the issue is often not a lack of love, but a lack of feeling safe. And I know that can be really hard because you're like, well, I'm not doing anything to make them feel unsafe. No, you're not. They just feel unsafe all the time. They just kind of feel afraid all the time. And it's not that they don't love you. They do. In fact, you're probably one of the most important people in their lives, and they wouldn't know what to do without you, but they don't know how to say that. And that can be really, really hard. And that's when relationships can move into what I call a cycle. And if you're not careful, it can actually fall into what is known as a downward spiral of negativity. And so this is usually the way it works. And it can go with one who has been through trauma or one who has not. This is pretty much universally true of relationships. And, Kyle, you can nod if you agree with me, but there's usually one person that I call the pursuer and another called the withdrawer. And usually in relationships, you have this dynamic of come here, come here, come here, get away, get away, get away. I want to talk to you. I don't want to talk. I want to lean in. I want to lean away. And so you have one spouse that wants connection, wants to talk, and pushes for reassurance. So things like, hey, how are you today? I'm fine. Well, no, really, tell me about your day. No, really, my day was fine. Are you sure we're okay? Like, is everything okay? Did I do something? No, I'm fine. Like, you have one who pursued, right? Kyle, you know I'm right. Yes. Kyle's laughing because it's so true. It's almost like I've been in your home, which I haven't, but I'm just saying it goes this way. You have one that wants to connect, wants reassurance, and then you have the other who shuts down the conversation, avoids the conflict, pulls away. And what that does is it creates a dynamic where the pursuer only wants to pursue more. The withdrawer only wants to withdraw more, and creates increasing greater levels of frustration. And that cycle is super, super common in marriages in general, but it is almost a given that if there is a trauma related incident event in one of the people's lives and they have not gone through therapy and worked through it, it's going to show up time and time and time again. And I've told over the years, I think I've said this phrase. I think I heard it from a guy named Mark Maddock. He was a marriage expert this was before podcasts. He was on a radio interview. But he said that marriage problems are pretty easy to fix. Relationship problems are pretty easy to fix. Hey, if you're not communicating, let's get you some soft skills so you can learn how to communicate. Let's teach you to empathize and actively listen and all of that kind of stuff. If you're having trouble with your finances, get a budget mentor, work through, figure it out, go to Dave Ramsey, whatever it is. But he said marriage problems are typically pretty easy to fix. Personal problems that affect the marriage, those are the tough ones to deal with. Those are the traumas and the triggers that we carry in from past relationships, past events, past pain that manifest in the current relationship and cause havoc. And we have to, in order to address those, we actually have to go all the way back to what's really going on. And that can be really hard when you're in a room with your significant other and you struggle with vulnerability. It can take a long time to be able to say out loud what really is going on to where you feel like it's safe enough to share. So let me go through a couple of tools. Just get really practical with you as you're listening in. If you want to work on, if you are a person who has been through traumatic experiences, you want to work on your marriage, you want to work on your relationship, or if you are in a relationship with someone who has gone through this, here's a couple of things that are really easy to frame, not necessarily easy to do, but they're easy to frame and work on. Tool number one, work on slowing down your conversation. Just slow down. There's a ton of research out right now about how noisy and fast our world has become. The increase of traveling sports, the increase of work demands. Companies now provide a cell phone or pay for a cell phone allowance, which carries with it the tacit expectation that you will answer your phone whenever it rings. You will answer your email as soon as you get it. Our world is so fast and is so noisy. Communication, if we are essentially saying that we want connection, then communication is primarily about listening first, and then listening some more, and having enough space and time to listen again. And a few things with that. Instead of saying something like, you never listen, or you always interrupt me, try something along the lines of, I don't feel heard right now. Taking the you statements and turning them around into feeling, personally, I feel like I'm not being heard right now. I feel like I can't finish a sentence is different than you always interrupt me. So turning those statements around, slow down the conversation, listen. And then tool number 2, learn trigger awareness. Ask the question, what situations escalate me? What tone affects me? What patterns make me shut down? I'll tell you one of my triggers. I got quite a few of them, but one of my triggers is when people talk down to me. When people condescend to me, when they treat me like a child, or they talk like I'm an idiot, or they're not wise with their words, and they kind of treat me like I'm a kid, it does something to me, like something snaps in me, and I have to walk away. I had this, believe it or not, I had this with my mother-in-law. I did. In Mackinac Island, we were talking about something and things got a little heated, and I just said, you know what? I need to walk away. And she said to me, that's right. You go calm down. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Later that night, my wife said, please, thank you so much for not telling my mom to F off. I was like, you're welcome. I knew that wouldn't have gone well in the moment, but she saw it in my face. She saw it in my body. We got to know what our triggers are. We have to know that we will be triggered. We have to be aware of it. We have to know how to communicate that, especially when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about situations that have put us in intense stress and pain. I am trying really hard these days to communicate my triggers to people that I love, and people that can hold me accountable and help see it before I can. Another trigger for me is when I get into like Costco. I have a 30-minute window in Costco. And then after 30 minutes, I feel really overstimulated. I feel really overwhelmed. It irritates me that people like take their cart and turn it right in front of me while I'm walking, and I can't speed up. I don't feel like I have control over where I'm going. So it can get really stressful for me. Those are triggers that I need to be aware of, and I need to be able to communicate. Tool number 3 is pattern. You need to build some predictability. So trauma healing loves consistency. It loves things that are constant. It loves things that are on repeat, things that can become predictable. So if you have somebody in your life that is working through trauma, you say you're going to do something, do it. Follow through is critical, because if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, that is going to lead to more confusion, frustration. It's going to reinforce that narrative that I can't trust people, I can't be around people. Trauma healing loves clear communication. If you have to write it down, sometimes actually, did you know that if people struggle to share their emotions verbally, they're usually better at writing it out. And at a minimum, if you have something really important to say, it may be worth writing it down and letting them read it before you say it. Trauma healing loves reliability. Are you a person who's reliable? You're going to be there when you say you're going to be there. You're going to show up when you say you're going to show up. You're dependable. And it loves honesty. People who have been through trauma do not like to be BS'd around. They don't like it when people sugarcoat things. They don't like it when people are trying to make nice. They want honesty. They want direct communication. They want things to be as clear as possible. So those are some things that you can do in your relationship if you're married or in a significant relationship with someone else, a romantic relationship. Think about, how do I slow down my conversation? What are the triggers that we need to be aware of? How can we build in some consistency and predictability into our relationship? A lot of that can go a long way. I want to talk to you just because this is not just about romantic relationships, it's also about friendships. Trauma can create isolation. It's a lot of people who have been through traumatic events will stop reaching out. They will feel misunderstood. They easily feel triggered by misunderstanding. They will burden other people. They lose trust in people quickly, and they feel emotionally exhausted. It is very common for individuals who have been through trauma to think something like this, like, I don't want to make other people worry. I don't want people to worry about me. I don't want people to have to carry this. The world already has enough problems. There's starving children in Africa. I don't have it that bad. Whatever it is, they'll do everything they can to make sure that people around them don't feel burdened. And it can lead to isolation. And here's the danger of isolation. Isolation often increases depression, makes things worse, increases anxiety. If you are a person who has moments of anxiety, you likely fall into racing thoughts or thoughts that you can't stop that just spin around in your mind. Let me just ask you, if you're anxious and you've got a lot of racing thoughts and you've got a lot of thoughts that you're thinking, is it possible? Have you ever had this where you think thoughts that aren't true, but you can't turn them off? One of the best ways to turn off untrue racing thoughts is to say them out loud to somebody else. So you can say actually out loud how ridiculous that sounds coming out of your mouth that was in your head. If you don't have anybody to talk to and you're all by yourself, that's just going to get worse and worse and worse. That's why people can literally spin out into manic episodes just because of racing thoughts. It can get so extreme. Isolation increases shame and self-loathing. It increases likelihood of addiction struggles because when you're alone and you've got nothing else to do, you might as well numb out. And it can increase hopelessness. Some common lies that trauma tells people in isolation is that no one understands. I don't know if you've ever had that, where you think nobody understands what I'm going through. Nobody gets me. Nobody really knows. Nobody really cares. How about I'm too broken? Like I'm just a mess. I'm just a piece of crap. People are better off without me. Like the world would be better off without me. And I can handle this all by myself. You ever had that one? Like I don't need anybody. I can handle this all on my own. No, you can't. None of us can, actually. We all need someone. I had that this morning. In full transparency, and I have trauma in my background. I've experienced some really hard and painful things. And this morning I was really angry. In fact, this morning I was more angry than I have been in 12 years. I was hot. And I called a friend, someone that I trust. He's a guy I've known for years. And I called him and I said, hey, I need someone that I can swear to. I need to say really bad words out loud, really loud. And I just need someone to listen. I don't need someone to tell me what I need to do differently. I don't need comments. I don't need feedback. I just want somebody to listen. He was like, absolutely, let her rip. And we all need that sometimes. We need people, especially if we're hurting and we can't do it alone. A couple really helpful tools that I've found. Good friends listen without fixing. If you want to be a good friend, you want to help somebody through an emotionally compromised time, don't fix it. Don't give advice. Truth is, your advice probably can't fix their situation. You got to know that straight out. They might just need you to listen. Just be there. Stay consistent. Again, if you say you're going to be there, be there. If you say you're going to show up, show up. If you say you're going to call, call. Avoid minimizing pain. We minimize pain a lot where we say, oh, it's really not that bad, or, oh, it could be worse, or, oh, there's starving children in Africa. I know there are starving children in Africa. That doesn't mean that the pain I feel is any less real in the moment. And the pain that I feel is real to me, and it matters in this moment. I was sitting with a parent today who was just going through something tough. And I just said, hey, can we just acknowledge that what you're going through sucks? It's really hard. Without trying to like wish it away or say, I know, or can we just sit in it? I'm not going to fix it, but we can sit and we can acknowledge that sucks. And that's really helpful. Show up repeatedly and create spaces of safety. If you've got a friend who's been through trauma, listen, they're going to respond to situations differently. They might not want to go out to a crowded bar. They might not want to go to a concert. You might need to create spaces that feel and are more safe, more controlled. That's okay. Here's a big one. I had this a couple weeks ago. You go to a restaurant with someone who's been through an intense combat situation, or they've gone through military training. They don't like to sit in an area where their back is exposed. So pre-selecting, hey, we're going to go to the restaurant. We're going to ask for a seat where you can have your back to the wall, or where you can see all of the exits and you don't have to like worry about who's behind you. That's really important. Just be aware of that. If it's a loved one or a friend in your life, you may have to be okay with sitting at a shitty table. That's okay. Because you want them to feel safe. You don't want to have a great seat in the house. You want your person that you're with to feel comfortable and safe and loved. Another practical thing you can do is if you want to build friendships, reach out to one trusted person every week. And I worked with a young man. He just graduated from therapy. That's what I'm calling it. That's what I call it when people don't need to come back anymore. Okay. I'm like, you can still come back if you want, but like, I think you're good and you're on the right path. So he graduated from therapy, but when he came to see me, his plan before he came to see me was to drive out to the Redwoods and end his life. He was going to drive to California and he was going to end his life. And he came and he met with me and we worked for months. And one of the things that we worked on was building friendships. And I asked him, who are some of your best friends? And he couldn't give me a single name. And then later he came back and he said, I looked through all of my text messages at people that have reached out to me over the years. And I've ghosted every single one of them. And then he said, I realize I'm a pretty terrible friend. So if you want to have friends, it's really good to start by being a good friend and start reaching out to people that you trust. Take a risk and have honest conversations. Try to rebuild connection points. Start small. You can start with why Ohio State is not as great as Michigan. Like that's fine. You can start with that. Most people agree on that. I'm pretty sure even people from Ohio State agree on that. And so you can start with small things like that, but then work your way up to more meaningful and honest conversations. A couple of things to remember in relationships, and this is specifically friendships, but also, yes, romantic relationships. Trust after trauma looks different. Trauma teaches us that people are not safe. Vulnerability is dangerous. We have to stay guarded all the time so we don't have to get hurt again. And emotional safety grows through consistency when we're around people who non-defensively listen, when the people around us are calm, when we have honesty, when we have boundaries. Boundaries are huge. And when we have respect for the people that we're doing life with. I just want to walk through a couple of just case studies. And when I say case studies too, these are examples from situations I've encountered before to just kind of play out how this looks. I've changed names, obviously. So these are not the real names of the people that I've worked with. But we had a situation. Mike had returned from deployment about 8 months before coming to see me. And since he had come home, his wife, Sarah, noticed that he rarely talked after work. He would sit in the garage for long periods of time before coming inside. So he'd get done working, he'd pull in, he would sit in his car, and he would just stay in his car for like 20, 30 minutes. And she's kind of like, what's going on? Like, do I get dinner ready? The kids are wondering what's happening. And so eventually she started asking, she's like, hey, what's wrong? And he would say this, nothing, or I'm just tired, or the classic, I don't want to talk about it right now. And then over time, Sarah started feeling lonely and rejected. And the more she felt alone and the more she felt rejected, she started pushing for more assurance and more communication. And then Mike started feeling more overwhelmed and pressured because she kept pushing the conversation. You see, like, this is not a good situation, but a lot of couples fall into this. And one night, Sarah said to him, and this was before they came to see a counselor, it feels like you don't even want to be a part of this family anymore. And she was just like, I don't even know if you want to be here. And he got defensive and angry, and he thought that she was going to like try to divorce him. And And I think, when you look through it, it's like, what trauma responses do you notice? Well, he was pulling away. He was isolating. He didn't want to communicate. He had trouble communicating his emotions. He's saying he's fine when he's not. He would get more agitated the more he got pushed. And of course, Sarah was experiencing loneliness and Mike was experiencing overwhelm. And both of them were unintentionally escalating this cycle of toxicity and negativity. And here's the question. Well, what would emotional safety look like? Well, I wonder how, and this is, kind of what we worked through. I said, what if instead of expecting Mike to come in and immediately engage, we just all agree that it's okay for Mike, after a long day of work, to need a half an hour of decompression time. And at this point, if the kids are working on their homework or whatever, is it possible for Sarah to just sit in the car with Mike when he comes home in quiet, to just be there with him? With that, we just tried that. Would you believe that after the first time of Sarah being in the car, Mike started talking about his day? He just needed her to be there with him, to know it was safe enough to be able to share. So that's what emotional safety looked like for them. Just the knowledge that, like, hey, maybe he's just gone through a lot today and he's processing. Here's another one with friendship. James was deeply connected to a close group of his friends from college and high school. And he had a traumatic injury. It was at work, but his work was driving a Humvee, and they hit improvised explosive device on the side of the road, and it flipped the car over. And so he had a traumatic injury. And then when he got back, he slowly stopped answering texts. He declined invitations to go out to the bar, and he isolated himself. And then so months after that happened, one of his friends said, where have you gone? Like, why you're just ghosting us? Like, why have you disappeared? And James said, hey, I'm fine. I'm just busy. Which, incidentally, there's a therapist who says that FINE is an acronym, which means feelings in need of expression. Yes, nobody is ever fine, ever. We are many things, but we are typically not fine. And here's what was going on. He was emotionally exhausted. He had a life-changing event. He feared that people would not understand what he was going through. He felt like he was going crazy. He didn't want to feel weak, didn't want to seem weak because, he was the military guy and his group of buddies. And he felt disconnected from who he used to be. And he didn't know how to operate in that group anymore. And I think when you think about all that, that makes sense. He would just isolate because he's like, I just don't know what to do. It's so hard to, maybe you've had this, if you've gone through traumatic experience and somebody doesn't really understand what you went through, it's a lot harder to explain what happened to you than it is to just stay quiet. That's one of the reasons why I'm just so thankful for OIS and the work that they're doing, because they create a space where people who have been through similar situations can sit down with someone who gets it right away. And they don't have to explain a whole lot, because that can be really hard. Honestly, the fears underneath James's I'm fine, pretty easy to understand. One of the things that was helpful for his friends is, instead of inviting him out to the bar, they would go to his house and just sit with him. Instead of like trying to go somewhere chaotic, they would create spaces where he didn't have to go anywhere. They would go to him. And they quickly found that things like, why don't you just say something? Why didn't you text us? Why? If they were peppering him with questions, he would just shut down. So they learned to just sit and listen really well. And they changed their operating system because it was easier for them to shift than it was for him to come their way. And that worked out really well for Mike, or for James. And yeah, that's pretty much our material, our webinar for today. I'll leave it open to, Jules, if you got any questions, or Kyle, if you've got any comments you want to make.
I did. So I was going to ask you a question, because we were talking through the pursue and withdraw kind of cycle. Have you ever seen that where the pursuer becomes the one that withdraws and the withdrawer becomes the one that pursues with that cycle? And, I think that's something that a lot of, from a military side and from being overseas and combat and stuff, we tend to be the withdrawer, or in a lot of times it's the guys that are the withdrawer, so that was one of the things that I was thinking about. And then at the beginning of the seminar, the webinar today, you talked about, reasons why we don't want to, open up and share. And one of the things that you probably didn't mention, or that I didn't hear anyway, was fear of judgment.
Yeah.
That I think really has a pretty big impact on a lot of our military, depending on what your role was and what you did. It's very easy to think back on what you went through and find judgment against yourself because of what we had to do. And I think sometimes it's a really easy way of thinking to just deny all of it, because you don't want anybody else to know or think of you the way you think of yourself, because of the judgment you kind of hold on your own. So I know a lot of our veterans struggle with that.
Yeah.
Especially a lot of our veterans from other eras. So, I go back to thinking about the Vietnam veterans that we have, and many of them have lived for years and never said much other than 2 words about their time in the service, and the amount of pain that they hold is extraordinary. And the type of men we had back then in World War II and Korea, I mean, they're all great people. They were put in a really bad situation. And, time and time again, I talked to a veteran who was in Vietnam. You guys got it so bad from being over in Iraq. And I'm like, there's no way that you can compare it. And you can't. It's 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
It's all combat. But what a comforting fact it is that you can go and sit down at OIS and talk through some of that stuff you went through, and somebody gets it. I've seen that firsthand in the healing that takes place, because you can unload some of that with somebody that understands it and can just kind of listen, and you can't fix it. So that listening part of it makes a big deal for a lot of our veterans.
That's really, really good. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. I mentioned the fear of being misunderstood, but the fear of judgment, it goes hand in hand with that. Like they're like 2 sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jules, you got any thoughts?
Just wanted to thank you, because a lot of what you said is things that I learned in nursing school and going through some courses, way back in the 70s. But just the fight, flight, fawn, fawn is new to me. I'd never heard of that term. So I appreciate you explaining that and giving the insight for that. My husband and I work with married couples, and trauma it's more prevalent, I think, than we know, not just with our veterans, but with our young people today.
Yeah. Jules, where do you live?
I live in Clare.
So interestingly enough, in a lot of this came from the work that I did working in pediatrics as a counselor, but 1 out of 4 boys in Michigan and 1 out of 3 girls are abused in some way. And Absolutely. So when you think of that, that's 25 to 30% of a base demographic. But then even more so, Michigan has the highest number of children who have gone through what they call adverse childhood experiences per capita than any other part of the country. And so Michigan is really unique in that we have a high volume of children who have been through events that register as trauma. So if you track that, I mean, every child eventually, unless something catastrophic happens, will become an adult. And so that means we have at least 25 to 30%, if not more, individuals entering into these relationships, which if you double that out, you've got one with and one without, you've got, probably 50% of your relationships that are experiencing trauma.
Absolutely. And because I worked in a special needs classroom, I saw it firsthand with some of the kids who I worked with.
Yeah.
And so, there's a whole blindness, I think, to this, and people need to wake up because children are they're going through trauma.
Yeah.
And nobody seems to be listening. Why are we to have all this trafficking in Michigan? People, they got to wake up.
Yeah.
These are our
tough.
children.
It's really, really tough, and it's really, really hard. And so, yeah, I agree with you, and I'm grateful to do this work. I'm grateful for you engaging in that. We're going to continue on with our webinar series. We've got another one coming up at the end of May. And just really grateful to share and spend this time with you. And we're gonna stop the recording here. And we're gonna sign off.